Welcome to Season 3 of the Today is a Good Day podcast, a podcast to bring you a new point of support as you navigate your NICU journey. Today is a Good Day is here to be a resource for you. We share personal stories from families who have been there, important advice from medical professionals, opportunities to focus on self-care, and more. Please don't forget to hit subscribe, share this episode with anyone who might find it helpful, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. The NICU journey can bring people into your life you never expected. I'll never forget the day I met our next guest walking through the halls of the NICU. I remember Melissa was wearing a Penn State sweatshirt, and I said, "We are," as I walked past her, and that truly opened the door for us to connect with each other, and we've stayed in touch for nearly 11 years. While our personal NICU journeys were different, we share a common bond of the NICU. Brett and Melissa have a special story to share today of strength, determination, and dedication, doing all that they could do to advocate for their sons born at 24 weeks and 5 days. Welcome, Melissa and Brett. Really great to have you here with us today. Tell us a little bit about your pregnancy journey before you welcomed your boys, Melissa.
So, pretty normal. We went for our 8-week first pregnancy, very excited, found out we were having twins. I thought Brett was lying to me when he said he saw 2 heartbeats, just, messing around with me because there's none in the family and it was just completely spontaneous twins. So we kind of felt there was some other kind of power, at play here. And that, we were really blessed. And so everything went beautifully from there. We were constantly told through the journey that with twins, it's high risk. You don't know what that means early on, just feeling good, enjoying it. And we went for it was a 19-week scan to find out what sex they were. And we got the 10 fingers, 10 toes, 20 fingers, 20 toes. Everybody looks good. And then they did, one of the other ultrasound and saw that my cervix was funneled. Again, not incredibly abnormal for having twins. I hear about people all the time that go on bed rest. Okay, that's a normal thing with multiples. So we left there that day, and they put me on bed rest that weekend and said to come back at after the weekend. And when we went back, everything was exactly where it was. My cervix was still just funneled at the same place. And as we're walking out the door, I'm in the frame of the door, they said, "You sure you don't feel any kind of contractions?" And I felt nothing. And they said, just to be safe, why don't you go across the street to Abington and get hooked up, right? So in the emergency room, they hooked me up. The contractions are just, off the charts. And I'm looking at it thinking, I don't feel a thing. It's not right.
Because it was so early.
It was so early, you don't feel it.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know what a contraction feels like, really. Never made it to that point in the pregnancy. And they didn't think that we would make it through the next few days. We were kind of, the nurses would give us little, tips here and there.
When you went over to Abington and they hooked you up, how far along were you then? Were you still at 20 weeks?
19 and change.
And so they put you on bed rest at that time?
They put me on bed rest at that time. And that was when I went into the mom unit at that point and never came out and was there until the obvious. But it was a roller coaster, being on the mom unit. Mom unit, never heard the term before.
Right.
Lots of never heard of it before. And so we were on the mom unit, still on kind of like modified bed rest. And as things progressed and got worse, my ability to get out of bed was just non-existent at one point. And I think Brett can kind of speak to some of what was happening from the doctor's point of view and like what he was hearing, because everybody was just trying to isolate me a little bit, keep me calm, keep me calm, keep me comfortable. Certainly seemed like contractions were related to levels of stress. So we created a very zen environment despite the chaos that was happening. But Brett knows what was going on and kind of all the talking behind the scenes.
Which I have to say, I mean, the fact that you were able to go in around 19 weeks and stay on bed rest until 24 weeks when the boys arrived is really amazing. But Brett, how were you feeling at this time, looking at Melissa on bed rest?
I mean, to speak to what you just said, I mean, there was really not too many people, even in the hospital setting, that would even really entertain any kind of thoughts of like a positive outcome. I mean, everything was more geared towards like just sort of how we're going to handle things after whatever happens. So it was overwhelming. I mean, it was you went from complete euphoria to having twins and to just wondering if she was going to be okay. It was very overwhelming. And I think it's like you're just trying to keep your wits about you because you know that you need to make some very serious decisions. And I was concerned that, she was going to push herself too far and potentially do something to hurt herself. But there was at least 3 or 4 times along the way where one of the attendings came in and said, look, one more drop of blood and that's it. Like, we're done. And every time, somehow, she managed to even get through the night. And somehow we were able to get through to, that very last night. I mean, even up to the last night, it was still just, touch and go. I mean,
It never leaves you, does it,
No.
Brett? You can just go right back
No.
to that moment for sure.
Yeah, Brett was saying on the way over, sometimes it feels like a movie that you look back on because it was a different life that we never lose sight of. And when we go back and talk about it, yeah, I mean, you can have those feelings all over again. There's definitely a bit of PTSD.
Yes. Yeah, we talk about that frequently. And on this podcast, we talk about that. But you did make it through. You made it through that last night and you welcomed the boys at 24 weeks and 5 days. Now, did you all know anyone who had been through the NICU?
No, I didn't. We didn't. I didn't know the NICU existed. When the doctors, I'm sure you remember when the NICU attendings start coming in. I think around 22 weeks, coming into your room to explain what might happen and what decision you want to make if they are not at viability, and we start negotiating with ourselves. Well, if it's 23 weeks and 6 days and 5 days. And, you cross that bridge when you get there. What would we do? What would our decision be? Unfortunately, they did get to 24 weeks and 5 days. So the decision was kind of made for us. And the introduction that they gave into the NICU what made it a bit of a softer transition. But we were just like imagining what this world was like. And then when we got there, it was like this dark corner of the hospital that's just hidden away that nobody knows about. I mean, overwhelming.
Yeah. I think as much a good job as they frame what to the best that they're able to, you're still sort of can't even begin to imagine what world you're stepping into. But to the credit of the NICU, I mean, they really did. They didn't try to paint any more of a rosy picture than we were going to be faced with. And I think at that point that was the first reality, because up to that point, no one even really was giving us a shot of even getting. So it was just not even like a conversation to then have to now think about. It was just unfathomable to have to just start to make these decisions, and it was just something that it does not leave you.
No,
ever.
and I think that's something I want to talk to you about, because I know we've shared our story over the years and with each other, and when you look at the decisions that you both had to make for the boys. When we look at the decisions that we talked about, I mean, how did you get through that? How did you end up making those really hard, difficult decisions even after the boys were born in the NICU?
I think we were a really good team in that regard, whereas I was really sort of just obsessed with research and
Obsessed, you?
And Melissa was more of like a taskmaster, and like she was able to, get things done and just, never accept just sort of any answer that, that we were being given. So clinically, I think Melissa really wanted to understand everything. So I was trying to sort of, try to remove yourself from the situation and try to remove all the emotion from it as best you can, and really try to make sure that you're not making like convenient decisions or decisions because you're scared, but the best decisions and making sure you're not doing them for emotional reasons.
And based upon the information that you have.
Exactly, which sometimes is different and coming from, different sources, and emotionally you're maybe perceiving it not in the way that you should. So, I think in that regard, we were really good partners for one another. We kept each other, balanced.
Now, you had a roller coaster ride of a NICU journey, and even after the NICU, which I'm looking forward to you sharing with the listeners. Tell us about the boys' NICU journey and what that looked like for you all and for them.
When they were first born, there really weren't any crazy, extreme concerns. I mean, there were 1.7 pounds and 1.8 pounds. I mean, that's a concern. Both were breathing on their own initially. As you know, they tend to puff out, and very regular par for the course. They go on, they get intubated then. But nothing in the early days. So we were hoping that we would just wait and watch and they would grow. They just have to get bigger, right? We were constantly wishing them to get bigger. And that's a common theme, I think, throughout. It took years for us to get past that, to grow out of their issues. But it started early. And so they went through a lot of the typical stuff, right? Retinopathy of prematurity, I think, was one of the earliest. The early exposure to oxygen. Many preemies wind up having laser ablation.
Cameron had what was it? What did he?
He had meningitis early on.
That was one of the first things that had happened.
Yeah. The memories get spotty as to the order, because again, that PTSD kicks in, and there's a lot of things you block out, and a lot of things that it's just too much to organize. But yeah, Cameron did have meningitis early on, and it was really scary. That was the first thing that we were encountered with, and it was the first time, you walk into the NICU, you wash your hands, and infection prevention is so huge, right? I mean, we can all relate to that now.
Still, always.
But in very different ways. Like we
Yes.
were quarantining, much earlier than the rest of the world. And still, no matter how safe we were, there was another child that had meningitis in his row, and somehow, Cameron got it. And so he had what was it called? His break.
Yeah.
He has scars, in his neck to his chest to do the port, because their little veins are so fragile, as you know. They just are constantly blowing veins, and they just need that access. So he did well with the therapies from the meningitis, but they do believe, or was suspected, that it probably had advanced his retinopathy of prematurity to a different state of what other kids experience in the NICU. Typically, they get their laser ablation, and they're nearsighted. They wear glasses.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty common. Cameron had the laser ablation. Brody had it too. Brody, no issues after that. Cameron had it, and there was still what they called a chemical war going on in his eyes, and it was pulling on his retinas. And we were very fortunate to have Rick Kaiser at Will's Eye, who's still, Cameron still sees him once a year. He's one of those heroes of the journey. Rick studied under Dr. Tracy and Dr. Capone out of Beaumont Hospital in Michigan, who were the only doctors in the world, really, that could save Cameron's vision.
2 doctors in the entire world. and we had 48 hours to make sure they were in the country, and we could fly him low altitude to get him to Michigan to try to save his vision.
Right. When we flew to Michigan, we didn't know if Cameron was sighted or not.
Or if we were going to have a house when we got back to pay for the flight.
Well, and I remember the day that you all left. We were in the NICU together, and I remember when you left that day with him.
It was intense. Even just getting the insurance approvals for all of this, talk about fighting and advocating and questioning things. The last thing that most people can think about is having to fight insurance for your child's vision and getting the right therapy. But we have Will's Eye right here. We have CHOP right here. So there are plenty of doctors who probably would have tried to take it on if, we hadn't.
They were. I think they were, actually. I think we were fortunate that he was a little aggressive with some of the doctors. I remember there was calls made like, stand down, like this needs to happen.
Right. So we had to get the right approvals. We went to Michigan on a nurse-staffed Learjet while Cameron was still on CPAP respiratory support in his little bullet.
Yeah.
And we were able to each take, we took one backpack for the two of us, and we went there not knowing when we'd come back, and we had to leave our other son, Brody, who was still intubated and had his own set of incredibly complex issues. We had to leave Brody in the NICU at Abington and just head out. And we just dealt with things, the most critical thing at the moment. That's what we dealt with. And then we would deal with the next one. Yeah. And so, when we went out there, it was quite a low, I think, one of our first biggest lows in our experience.
It was the first time that we were away from we were away from everything else. Everything
that we knew, right? The NICU becomes your home.
Just the two of us in this dreary apartment and waiting to see if he was even going to be able to see. And I think that what was important at that point was it started where the journey started, then took two paths. Mm-hmm. From that point forward, logistically, our kids were, I don't know if they ever again, maybe for a very short period of time, were ever in the same hospital again. Mm-hmm. And that became probably the biggest struggle was logistically always, there was one kid in one hospital, another kid in another hospital. It just was extremely difficult to ever feel like you're giving what you can to the kid that needs it, because it was very difficult.
Well, I think you said such an important piece of advice. We hear a lot from families. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I don't know if I'm making the right decision. I don't know how to make these decisions. But I think hearing from you, Melissa, we tackled the most critical challenge at the moment, right? And when you look at the decisions that you have to make and categorizing them in the most critical, what can wait, how do we tackle this? I think that's such a great piece of advice. And I have to tell you both, listening to your story, knowing your story personally as well, I think it's so important for people to know that they are not alone. Others have navigated through everything that you all have gone through. I'm sure there is somebody sitting out there going, I'm the only one doing this. How am I supposed to get through this? And I think it's so important that they hear others have gone through it. Yeah. Right?
I think something that something that was really important that, Melissa actually pushed for and that we did was, I think it's easy to sort of let other people sort of start to, the voices start to get to you. And I think that we made decisions that maybe didn't seem as popular at the time. And, certain hospitals may have not have been as prestigious as others, but believed that the specialty that we were seeking in that particular hospital was exactly what we needed. And I think that it was difficult to take that risk. And I think you just have to say, look, I'm going to do what's best for my kid, and I'm just going to move forward and be confident with it, knowing that, people, why you have CHOP here? Why are you going there? And it's, that's the difficult part when people start to second guess you and you're just in action mode. I think that can be difficult.
So after the eye surgery, how long were you in Michigan?
2 weeks.
Right. We were there over the holidays.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
And then came back to the hospital.
We came back to Abington to have to start to make decisions with Brody.
We knew at that point that the surgery we had got him there in time, that he was eligible to have his vision saved. And we left there with them saying that they did not believe he would see darkness.
Right. But we didn't know what level of vision he would have.
It could have been anywhere from, blurry to like, really hard to see, really hard to function.
So talk to us about Brody's journey through the NICU. What did that look like for him?
Another common ailment with preemies is reflux. Cameron had it too, but Cameron's was as bad, but it didn't impact his airway. So when the acid from the stomach constantly hits the airway, and then you have that in combination with children that have difficulty getting extubated. Brody was intubated, extubated upwards of 10 times, constantly hit with steroids to bring down the inflammation. So you have inflammation in the airway and then constant reflux. He never got a break. So his apnea was different. It was life-threatening many times. He had to be resuscitated many times. And so eventually we were hoping that the intervention could be getting his G-tube, but having his stomach wrapped as well, fundoplication. So he was taken to St. Chris. That was the hospital they were associated with at the time.
Yeah, he couldn't breathe.
Right.
He was blue.
Well, so he was taken to St. Chris to get his stomach surgery, stop the reflux, and now feed through the G-tube to gain weight. He also expired a lot of calories, just trying to breathe. Simple things that we all take for granted. And so he was failure to thrive, and we just had to pump his little belly full of food in a different way. So he had the surgery, and it stopped it for a while. We were still having difficulty extubating him. And he continued to have major retractions in the way that he breathed all the way. I mean, he went home with those retractions. So it became a norm. Unfortunately,
came back the same day.
Right. Well, do you
you
remember the term NICU-itis? You
Yes.
become you put the blinders on, and that was our norm with our child. We've never been parents before. We've never been through this. That was Brody's norm. That was the way he breathed. And as long as he was gaining weight, we kept that going. So he was eventually discharged that way and went home, and we had multiple occasions where he went down. So he came home on just oxygen and a constant apnea monitor, his pulse ox, and nurses just kind of dropping in. And we had an episode where he went down. We were in a new construction development. The ambulance couldn't find us. We had to throw him in the back of the car and rushed to St. Chris from Bucks County.
Blue the whole time.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
He was seizing in the back of the car. So this was our first week home with a new baby who had taken several months more than his brother to get home.
I think like the lesson really that I took from that was sort of like, when you're in the NICU, you sort of get like indoctrinated into this little small family, and you start to sort of judge progress by everybody else. And I think it's easy to look at all the different goals, and you want your kid to be intubated, extubated, but at the end of the day, I mean, every kid needs what they need. And as a parent, if you feel like your child is being being pushed too fast, that you absolutely should stand up and say something.
Mm-hmm. We didn't know that then, and you can't know that when you're going through it.
We didn't know that. We didn't know it, and and I don't think that was necessarily. I'm not saying that was necessarily even the case with Brody. I just think that like you want to be cognizant of like, is it trying to get the child out of the NICU and home, and then, or is it getting him out of the NICU to where he's going to be able to thrive and move forward when they get home? I think there's like a really big difference between those two
It's a hard balance to find.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, 1% of NICU babies, or I think 1% of all children, maybe even, get trached.
Did he have his trach when he went home the first time, or he came back then?
He went back to Abington and then was discharged, a few days later, had another episode at home where once I threw him in the car to get to St. Chris, we never came out of St. Chris. So he was trached at St. Chris. Difficult decisions, right? Because we had been told that up until this point that, again, 1% of kids get trachs. It's very unlikely. He just needs to get bigger. His airway needs to get bigger. He needs to just grow. And when we got to St. Chris, we met another hero of the story, Dr. Steinfeld, a pulmonologist there, who said, all right, because we were resistant, I'll hang out. We'll see how it goes. But I'm telling you, he's walking the line. And there was a point where he said, okay. And he helped us make that decision.
It was hard. I mean, he immediately got sepsis after he was trached, which was really hard, like after we made that decision. And that was probably the lowest point. I mean, that was the lowest point of the entire process. Because they said that he couldn't breathe any longer. It was like traching him was letting him breathe. There was really no more options. It was like, he can breathe and he will be able to hopefully wean off the oxygen, and it's not a big deal. He's going to function in every other way. It wasn't something that was necessarily neurological. And but as soon as we did that, during the recovery process, he started to swell up, and they had to put him in a medically induced coma, and
he had a hospital-acquired infection,
and our families, and they called. It was horrible.
So Brody got a hospital-acquired infection, and they had a hard time identifying what it was. It wound up being Candida yeast in his bloodstream that went septic. So he was supposed to be trached to room air, and then he would be walking and getting around just like any other kid, but give his airway that reprieve. And he was never trached to room air. He was trached right to life support. And yeah, that was another really crazy low point for us, because while they were waiting for the cultures to grow, right? And his leg was cold and his head was blue, and we were making those arrangements. We were making those arrangements.
There was no more. They had said that the last IV they put through his heart, and they said that was it. Like if the infection continued, there was nowhere else to put it. And that's, that night, I think we all went through that night thinking that we wouldn't see him again.
This is also an experience in questioning things. We joked that I had made residents there cry because every morning at rounds, not having answers wasn't acceptable.
Right.
And I pushed and I pushed, and I researched and I researched. And, finally, when they were able to identify that it was Candida, then they could treat it.
And I think you made a good point, what we were talking about a little bit earlier, that one of the heroes of the story, the doctor who recognized that he needed a trach, put in to help him breathe. I think it's finding the medical providers that you feel really good with, and that it's okay to go and find second opinions. It's okay to call other hospitals. It is okay to do the work that you need to do and to ask the questions. You both are the biggest advocates out there for Brody and Cameron. It's really incredible and a testament to you two for all that you have done for your sons. Just amazing. But it is that never giving up of asking questions. I did want to ask you about when you came home from the NICU. Cameron had already come home. Brody was still in the hospital. When Brody came home, what did that look like for you all with their medical needs?
Brody didn't come home initially. He was released to a rehab facility so that he could learn how to breathe and sit up at the same time, so that he could learn how to eat and breathe at the same time. So that was in New Jersey. We lived in Bucks County. Cameron wasn't allowed to go initially. So again, we were separate. Brody was in hospitals for 10 months. Our kids didn't get to interact with one another.
We had a NICU at our house.
Right.
That's what we did.
After he finally reached those milestones through rehab, and I say the phrase that we rehabilitated babies, which is just a contradiction of terms, right? But it really is.
I don't think most families, I don't think most families would have made the decision that we made to send Brody to Weissman. I think that was, and in hindsight, was probably the best decision that we made.
That's the rehabilitation
It was,
facility?
yeah, because it wasn't necessarily deemed mandatory, but it was, we knew that having him there, he would be able to get the physical therapy every day, and the staff there really loved him. And it was just another case again of just sort of like Melissa understanding like what the kids needed and doing the research and just sort of saying like, I know what's best for my kids, so like we're just going to make a decision and let's just go, rather than, you know, sit and wait and feel sorry for ourselves.
Well, and Melissa, talking about that, researching, finding the information that you needed, how did you find the right specialist? I mean, what did you do to find the right specialist? Your boys were in some clinical trials, right?
They're in kind of constantly ongoing. Yeah, if you're a part of certain clinics within CHOP, you know, you are opted in, but nothing that we're aware of any major, you know, changes yet.
But how did you go about finding those specialists? What was your process for that?
He took Avastin, which at the time was like experimental, and then he had the cartilage harvested. But I mean, it was relentlessness. That's what it was. I mean, it was relentlessness.
It was relentlessness, but it was also, there were times that things were so critical that it took us to a different place. And in that moment, we had to say, are we going back to Abington or are we going to St. Chris, where we had been introduced to some of the doctors through their consults with Abington. It was just clear that there would be moments that we would have to make tough calls to pivot. So we were fortunate to find doctors that we related to and trusted, and they proved themselves to us in each of the facilities that we touched. So, you know, at the end of the day, here they are 11 years old, and, you know, they have been at Abington, Beaumont Hospital in Michigan, St. Christopher's, and CHOP. And at one point, they were seeing specialists at both St. Chris and CHOP, and it's not an easy process. Electronic health records doesn't mean anything.
They were using handwritten notes back then.
Right. No, they were faxing. Communication all had to go through us.
And that was in addition to other therapies that they had. Through PT, right? Physical therapy, speech therapy.
Yeah, well, it was very hard because we couldn't even get to that place until they weren't so medically fragile for a lot of the time. But yes, it was a lot to coordinate. And Brody was on life support at home. Yeah. So we had a binder for each kid. Brody traveled with his binder and his, you know, armory of equipment and a nurse at all times. But you know, it's even in those days, it's hard to recall when they say, well, what surgeries have your kids had?
You know what? I think, Melissa, one thing that I think like we were never afraid of was finding doctors that would allow us to challenge them and to push them and to really try to push the limits of, you know, what type of options are available, especially with, you know, when you have kids that are born under 2 pounds, it's a whole different type of medicine, and there's the traditional rules no longer apply. So a lot of times there's different techniques that doctors are using that they're maybe not going to use every day, and maybe there's things that you need to pull out of them. And I think by really pushing doctors and pulling out different things, we were able to find some things that were maybe not things that were being used every day, but like Dr. Chan, he was like, you know, one of those doctors, Dr. Kai's. I mean, like there was just doctors that we just wanted to know everything that was happening in the future, and was there something else that we could possibly do for our kid in that moment. But
Brett, can I ask you, just as a dad in the NICU?
Yeah.
How did you get through it from a dad's perspective? And maybe what advice do you have for other dads that are going through this, and how you were a support?
I think it was a little unique just because we had twins. So I think in that scenario, the dynamic's a little bit different. There's a lot less decisions that need to be made. There's 2 kids, so 2 parents, so there's always a child that's going to need to be accounted for. But I think that, you know, look, back then, I mean, it was very difficult. It's hard when, you know, a lot of times when something like this happens, maybe you're aware, but there's other times when you're not. And when it happens and you're not, and your ecosystem of friends has never experienced anything like that, and it's almost as if the advice you're getting is making things even worse because people are minimizing your situation and just being like, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. And I think it was very hard you become very isolated very fast, and you just sort of go into like, well, like, I'll worry about this, when we get through this. But it was, again, I mean, like, my number one thing was I was, even after the children were born, I mean, Melissa still had like a difficult time. I mean, not physically, I mean, I was like really concerned about Melissa. And I mean, you were fight or flight for a very long time. I mean, you just wanted everyone to live and get through it. And then from there, you would figure it out. And then that's when the hard work really started. I mean, Melissa coordinating the therapies, I mean, that was 100 times harder than, anything we did in the NICU.
Well, yeah, we didn't know how to navigate having a child on life support at home. There's no guidebook. That was, what helped me make that decision to have Brody go to rehab after. It was for us to learn how to care for a child with a trach. You have to change his trach every week, have to change his G-tube every week. Nursing there's not enough skilled nursing. So
we had a nurse in our house at some point every day for probably 2 years. There was not a day that went by.
So there was no sleeping. I mean, so making that decision was also training for us, to equip us to be able to handle this. It was terrifying, and I wasn't ready.
And it was giving you all the resources that you could to go home and to manage this on your own and helping.
Yeah, it takes a village. That's grandparents were the only ones that were allowed in because it was we were in isolation. Brody could not get sick again. So the grandmothers are our other co-parents, and thank God for them. We could never really be, even though there were 2 of us and 2 kids, we could never really be alone with the kids on our own. We needed the nurse. When the nurse wasn't there, even the 2 of us and 2 grandmothers sometimes wasn't enough. It was constant at home. It was...
How was today? The G-tube exploded. Oh, that's it? Like, that was a good day.
Well, that happened pretty much every day.
Well, and I want to ask you, with all that you had to take care of at home with the nurses, with the needs of both Brody and Cameron, what did that look like for you, Melissa, with your job? I mean, you had a full-time role before you welcomed the boys. What happened there?
This was a really hard reality for me. We both had great careers and had really thought we achieved a place that, you get married, you have kids, you're at this point in your career, you get the first house, you get the second house, and that's the way it goes. So accepting that reality changing so significantly felt selfish, but it was a necessity. It was survival. And so I never planned on not working, and I had to stop. So I did medical device sales before, so I think that it helped equip me to do the proper research and know, plenty about clinical trials. So in some ways, I think that all of my career training to that point prepared me to navigate all of this. I stopped the day that I had to officially resign when all of my disabilities were over. It was like I lost my identity, but we don't matter anymore, right? We were in survival mode until Brody got his trach out. So this is a good 4 years of chronic, serious medical conditions and balancing therapy with that.
Right.
I had to be fully committed to the kids. They were my job. And again, rehabilitating them there was no other option for me. I was going to give them all the resources that they could overkill at times, that they could possibly have to Brody. We didn't know if he'd ever walk or talk. I was going to get that kid's legs moving. Like, we did everything.
We're determined. Yeah.
Outside of early intervention, we hired private consultants. We were fortunate to be financially comfortable going into it, but no one planned for me not to work. We made financial decisions when there wasn't money to put towards it. We were committed to, if we had to lose everything, we would do what we needed to do to give them all the resources and, pay privately out of pocket if needed for certain procedures and certain therapies.
And I think it's really important to note, I feel like when you're in the middle of that, it probably felt like for you that it was going to go on forever, right? And you are now on the other side of that. back to work. And that was a chunk of time that you dedicated and then were able to get back into your career.
Well,
right?
Had to reinvent myself a bit.
Yes.
But yeah, new career. But yeah, looking back at it, it's very hard when you're in the NICU and you're going through the darkest days when people say, God only gives you as much as you can handle, and there's a reason for everything, and all of the little hopeful cliches, because it just feels like no babies deserve this, right? There's not always a reason for everything. So I can't look back and say, this was supposed to happen this way. But I think that it served a purpose in all of our lives because we turned it into something good. We turned a bad experience into lessons. And I think the kids they're amazing kids, and they are such sensitive kids, very self-aware.
Well, what I was going to say is they are a real inspiration for others. I mean, when you see them today and see their beautiful smiles and faces, and we've been friends for a long time, they are a true inspiration for other families. The boys are going to turn 11 as of the recording of this podcast, and they have certainly been through so much. And I really want to ask you both a question now. So while you both are no longer together as a couple, you co-parent, you work together to help them. What has that looked like for you? Brett, do you want to start?
Stop laughing. It's been a dream.
I think Melissa and I were just talking about this today. And I think that when you go through something like we went through, that I think that there's a lot of it's an experience that I think no matter if you're with that person when they experience it or not, I just think it's something that for the rest of your life, not really anybody can ever put themselves in those shoes. And I think that, look, we had our challenges. I don't think it's any secret that, kids that are born into the NICU present a tremendous amount of challenges for really any marriage. I think that, look, in hindsight, if I would have known now, like how my kids are doing now, I would have saved myself a lot of pain, and I think it's hard to be positive, but I think if I were to go back, that was probably the thing that I regret the most. And I think that, Melissa and I think always really made it a point to try to want to be better parents and better co-parents. And it wasn't always easy. And, but I think that ultimately we got to a place to where I think that a lot of people would probably be pretty jealous of the situation, that we have. So I'm fortunate.
The experience of feeling isolated and lonely and no one can relate, extends even as far as people that have been through the NICU. No two experiences are the same. We both went through together. Our friends were wonderful. They were so supportive, but we were in a different world, so we became reclusive. The only other person that could understand what I was going through is Brett. The only other person, we just bonded that way. So no matter how crazy he drives me, no matter how much we fight, we're divorced, it's a normal reality. No matter what it looks like on the outside, I don't want to paint a picture that's rosier than it is, but we are both the reason we live is for our children.
They don't realize how lucky they are that we have the relationship that we do.
Yeah.
Well, I think
And so disagreements aside, that's something that we always agree on, is that their best interests is in always the goal. And that when we do things together and we have experiences together, we go to basketball games, we will have days at the shore together, we try to do some holidays together. I'm good friends with his girlfriend. Our families were still both, very kind of tied in. They'll always be family. So the more that we can show them that divorce doesn't make them any different. That your family will still do things together. Your parents still care very much about one another. And, I think they have a pretty awesome life. And so my goal, look, when your kids start off this way, I think you're constantly overcompensating for the trouble and the difficulty that they've had. They barely remember it, but we try to overcompensate with happiness and, giving them the best memories that they can have. So, we're a team. I think we were the best team ever when I was in the hospital, when they were in the NICU. We complemented each other really well. We fought together, and you get home and it's a new normal, and it's not normal. We did not have anything close to normal. So kind of what happened from there is pretty natural considering the circumstances. And now, we're just back to that partnership in a different way.
I think it was important for me. I think that, everyone has their own experience, but like at the end of the day, no matter what happened with Melissa and my marriage, my kids are here because of her. And it was important for my kids to know that. And no matter what happened with us, it was always just really important for me that they knew that, and that they knew that I felt that, and they do.
It's a really valid point. Like, we are both responsible for why they're here and why they're so great. And there's just bonds in the whole experience that no one could relate to.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, because I think that will really resonate with a lot of people because it is a struggle, a marriage, and when you go through so many traumatic things. So I appreciate your honesty and sharing your personal story. You have shared a lot today. Your journey is even more than what we even talked about today, but a resource for families who want to learn more and see what you have gone through. You have a blog that you kept and refer to as a baby book, right? You have it here. But you have a blog, and I remember reading the blog. But while it may not be up to date now with the boys, you share a lot about your story. And where could people learn more?
It's twotoughTwins.blogspot.com. TOUGHTWINS.blogspot.com. It started as a journal entry that I wrote when I was in the hospital. My own thoughts. I was just writing to myself.
It's raw.
It is raw.
The first one, it was rough, yeah. And then it became, when you're in the NICU and everyone wants updates, everyone kind of feels entitled to updates. It becomes
overwhelming.
Very cumbersome. And so it turned into a place to update everyone. And then it became just really cathartic. I highly recommend anyone going through this type of an experience, or just having children with chronic medical issues. I kept it as a way to communicate with people, but also my own therapy. There were days where it felt like it was a task to complete and get it all out, but it is the baby book. There's no time to be doing all the cute stuff. And
there was also days that we felt like it was a miracle, right? It wasn't all, and it was like, oh my God, like, we need to capture this. Like,
right.
The days that are horrific, but at the same time, then there's days you're like, oh my God, does he see that? Like, he really sees that? Like, we have to get that
moments.
So now, you said, looking back, 11 years later, did I ever imagine we'd be here? No, I was terrified that we wouldn't get here. I was terrified of what it would look like when we got here, if we were fortunate enough to make it that far. And
there's no way you would expect a happy ending if you read this. So anybody that wants motivation, if they read this and then met my children, it would give them reason to keep pushing and keep believing, because this story does not look like it's going to have a happy ending, but it does.
And what I'm so grateful for, and you and I have stayed in touch over the years when we have families who have gone through similar journeys to you, or components of the journeys that you tackled with either one of your sons, you've been such a great resource for others to talk with them about how you got through it. And I'm really grateful to you for that.
I would love to continue doing more of it. All I wanted to see was, when we were in the NICU, was what is it going to look like 10 years down the road?
Don't we all, Melissa? Don't we all?
And, 10 years prior, it looked very different, right? It's all come very far. So it's a very different story now than what a lot of the children and the situations that, we would have heard stories from. So, always willing to share and want to be more involved.
So do you have a piece of advice that you would give to other families going through the NICU right now? Brett, I'll start with you.
Your story is yet to be written. I think that it's easy to, write an ending, but I really think that, that's what I did. And I think that I'm ashamed to say it, but, I think that you need to really just sort of accept the fact that your story is going to be a little different, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to be as fulfilling or it's not going to be as rewarding, and you just need to keep going. And it sounds pretty basic and pretty cliche, but I mean that's really the best advice I could give. Ask a lot of questions, and don't ever feel like that if you're not getting the answers to questions from a particular doctor, then keep asking until you get them, because you have a right to understand what your child is going to experience.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that a lot of people will put their hands in complete trust with the trained medical professionals who are amazing at what they do. But question. There's a thin line between Googling to learn a bit about what to question, right? It's about having resources. So like I said, I felt equipped to do the research and to disseminate what was applicable and what wasn't. But not all people have that. So find an advocate, find many advocates from different angles, and just be a student of it all. Be a student, learn, question.
Accept
when
the
something
help.
seems viable, then push for it, because it's not always easy. It's never easy to get the resources that you need, but we're still fighting for things, fighting and advocating. And I don't want to put that in a bad light, because it's what's gotten them to be as successful in everything that they do, and just to just be the best kids ever, because they've had resources that maybe if we hadn't pushed for them, wouldn't have had the same results.
I believe that 100%. There's no doubt in my mind that that's the case. No doubt in my mind.
You talk about keeping your blog, Two Tough Twins, to share your story through the NICU and after the NICU. Brett, you talk about the happy ending. Well, what does that happy ending look like? How are Cameron and Brody doing today?
I mean, they're two thriving, rambunctious 11-year-olds.
Fresh
11-year-olds. That do things that, I used to pray all night if I would ever be able to do them with them. Now it's unbelievable. There's not a day that goes by that I'm not, I don't thank God for, who they are today. So
Brody does not have his trach. He got it out at 3.5. He did have a surgery that to open his airway up that impaired his vocal cords. So his voice is a little different. He has a voice. There was a point we were trying to learn sign language. We didn't know if he'd ever walk or talk or walk. And Brody now plays basketball and just doesn't stop. I mean,
doesn't stop talking.
We didn't know if he'd ever be able to play sports. So just living his best life. And Cameron is very functionally sighted and able to do all the typical things. He knows his limits. Very self-aware, but they both went to day camp this summer, and very different terrain, very unpredictable. Cameron did great.
They're in regular schooling.
Yep.
Regular camp. I mean, they have some additional help, but for the most part, they're they're on track with kids that are their age. So I think that's the most important part.
Really amazing. Well, thank you both for being here, and thank you for all you have done to help Brody and Cameron be the best that they can be. It's really great talking with you today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
This episode of the Today is a Good Day podcast is brought to you with support from Life Celebration by Givnish and KeyBank.